This he talks about wake up. Um, well, what I call wake up. You know, when we started Wake Up as a movement, which is a movement for young people, Thai originally called it Young Buddhists for a Healthy and Compassionate Society. And that was in 2008. And I remember being in the Kim Lien Hotel in Hanoi. And Thai, myself and the former abbot here, Thai Phap Ho, and Thai Phap Tan, we went into Thai's room to say goodbye. We were coming back here to Deer Park. And Thai wasn't so interested in saying goodbye. You know, Thai practices no coming, no going. But Thai was very fired up and excited about this new movement he had started. And but when he said young Buddhists for a healthy and compassionate society, we thought, wow, that's quite a mouthful. And fortunately, it was shortened to Wake Up. And many of the quotes in this book I feel are so appropriate for the Wake Up movement. Youth is a time for seeking truth. Youth is a time for seeking truth. Actually, any time is a time for seeking truth. But if you're young and you're not seeking truth, you need to look and see where you're putting your priorities. Years ago, I wrote in my journal that even if it destroys you, you must hold to the truth. And we know that Thai was a great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, who taught Satyagraha, which is literally holding to the truth. Satyagraha. I knew early on that finding truth is not the same as finding happiness. You aspire to see the truth, but once you have seen it, you cannot avoid suffering. Otherwise, you've seen nothing at all. You are still hostage to arbitrary conventions set up by others. People judge themselves and each other based on standards that are not their own. In fact, such standards are mere wishful thinking, borrowed from public opinion and common viewpoints. One thing is judged as good and another as bad. One thing as virtuous and another evil. One thing true and another false. But when the criteria used to arrive at such judgments are not your own, they are not the truth. Truth cannot be borrowed. It can only be experienced directly. The fruit of exploration, suffering, and the direct encounter between one's own spirit and reality, the reality of the present moment and the reality of 10,000 lifetimes. For each person, it is different. And it is different today. It is as different today, or it is different today. Hold on, I think this is a typo. For each person, it is different. And it is different today than it was yesterday. There must be a... Okay, I found a typo for parallax. Does it make sense? Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, we have to do another revision. There's a lot of... Oh no, actually in Lotus in a Sea of Fire, there are a few... We have to do a few typos. Anyway, that's my editing mind. So Thai, throughout his life, had a vision of young people engaging with society in order to find truth in themselves. And there is a degree to which we cannot, social conventions, even the convention of this monastery, perhaps, even the conventions of the 5-year program and all these things, good conditions that we create for young people to explore the truth. Sometimes, I know in my own experience, I had to just go out into the world and without any form, try to remove any kind of convention. For myself, that was after college, going and living abroad, living in Europe, and living in activist communities, squatting communities, anarchists, I lived in an organic farming community, which, I didn't know anything about Thai and Thai's path, but I think a lot of us go through, if we try to really engage with the world outside of forms and conventions, then we find ourselves coming up against the world and difficult situations. And just like Thai did with Phung Boi, and later with the School of Youth for Social Service. And for me, it was living in alternative communities and learning how to live off the land and farm, and discovering that the challenge is not to live off the land, the challenge is to live in community. And all the difficulties that come with living in community. So this quote is it's like very dear to my heart, that we need to take that time. We need to have enough, for those of us who are older and we have children, we need to have the confidence to support them in their exploration. Because it's a great tragedy to be caught in the conventions of the world and not to discover truth in oneself. We often talk here, when I talk with Taifa Byung especially, about the lack of rites of passage in modern day society. Every society at its roots has some forms of rites of passage. And today we have maybe going to college, but it's arguable whether that's a rite of passage. Usually it's something that's physically, we push ourselves to the limit. So sometimes athletes experience rites of passage in their pushing themselves physically to an extreme. In some tribes you would do something like a vision quest by not taking very little water or fasting for a long time in the wilderness. Something that pushes us to our limit as a young person in order to see what's really there. Yeah, when we strip away all these layers of convention. And there's some degree to which an institution even like Deer Park, we can't even we can only go so far in supporting that, right? In the sense that we create good conditions for people to transform and heal. But I know that many people will come to Deer Park and then they will go off, and they might... For me, when I went to Maple Forest Monastery, which was our center in Vermont, actually the first center that we had in the United States. When I did my first retreat there, I just had my backpack. And I decided that the retreat was so profound and moving. I'd been on other Buddhist retreats before, but somehow being with the Plum Village Sangha, it felt like family. It felt like this was the community that I'd been looking for. Trying all these different, activist, alternative communities. And then this one, somehow, it touched me in a way I just hadn't experienced before. And I'd been on other Buddhist retreats and gotten a lot of insight and healing, but there's something about this community, that the way that people were expressing themselves and the sincerity, that was just very, very touching. And so I didn't want to go back straight into the world after doing a retreat. So I would spend a week. The first time I didn't know what I was going to do. I just walked out of the monastery. But I ended up spending a week, and I climbed Mount Ascutney, and I made a raft to cross the Connecticut River to the other shore, which is New Hampshire. Which is live free or die, right? Anyway, I did a bunch of things, but to have that experience of just not of aimlessness, of kind of lived aimlessness, and allowing yourself to where you're the only one responsible. Like here, Deer Park, we support all of you. We take some measure of responsibility for your welfare. We want you to be okay. If you have some kind of something coming up that's difficult, well, we'll do our best to come and support it, or we'll try to find those who can. And some of us have lived in those kind of environments our whole life. And maybe that's, and it's not to say we cannot touch truth in that space by going within ourselves. But I really resonate with what Tai is saying there. I know that by going out and starting Feng Boi, he was opening a space of unknown, of unknowing, and going into it and seeing what happens, taking a huge risk for himself personally. Later, when we see in this Lotus and the Sea of Fire, when he goes and begins speaking out, showing a third way for the situation of the war in Vietnam. He knows that he does it at great risk to himself. At first, he does not imagine that he will not be allowed to go back to Vietnam. And so he knows that when he goes back to Vietnam, by speaking out in the West, every day his life will be quite precarious. It will have huge effects in Vietnam, his voice in the West. So that's I think a topic for reflection, and maybe the topic that we can reflect on for the next class, which is looking into our own life and seeing what kind of rite of passage or rites of passage do we feel has helped to form us, has helped to push us to a limit in a way that we could gain a deeper understanding of the truth of what our deeper meaning in life is.